Since changing the name of the Eclectic Americana Friday morning drive time radio show on January 20th, 1989 to the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club, the DJs in the collective have strived to entertain and inform our listeners. Airing from 6 to 9 a.m. Pacific at KZSC 88.1 FM in Santa Cruz, California, the Bushwhackers usually have 2 interviews a week, each airing for about half an hour. We're not afraid to ask questions or admit that we don't know something, and we don't mind taking deep dives or following a tangent as we get into how sausage is made in local, county, or state politics, as well as learning about things going on in our community or discussions with artists. Our interviews are not scripted and are co-produced by myself, Dangerous Dan Orange, and Sleepy John Sandage. Oh, those instrumentalists, they never get no respect, right? Let's just that, and that, and that, and that, and we can say, good morning, you're on the air.
Good morning.
California Assemblymember Mark Stone, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. What district do you represent?
I represent the 29th Assembly District, Santa Cruz County, Northern Monterey County, and a little bit of Santa Clara County.
And that district is changing, or it has changed? Help us with the verb tense.
Well, that district will change. So I was elected in 2020 to represent this district. In 2022, so this coming fall, people will be elected into districts that look different than they do today.
Gotcha. And your district, you're losing a part of Monterey County, but you're picking up Mountain View and some parts of southern Silicon Valley?
No, so as of the December of 2022, the district that I live in will include northern Santa Cruz County, so City of Santa Cruz, Scotts Valley, San Lorenzo Valley, and then we'll go over the hill into Los Gatos, San Jose, all the way down to Morgan Hill.
Gotcha. And I know there's been some kerfuffle over the Salinas Valley, Watsonville becoming kind of a hanger-on to to Silicon Valley. Is this final? It's over. It's done. There's no changing. Is this where we are now?
Yes, it is. And for me, the sad thing is the smallest county in the state, County of Santa Cruz, will be represented by 3 members of the Assembly. It's just irrational. The commission doesn't seem, and so I've only been sort of tracking our areas, but the commission just doesn't seem to understand California and doesn't understand communities and how California is structured and governed. Because I guess this is a complaint that I'm hearing in a lot of places. They've broken up areas like this, and I think Santa Cruz is a case in point where the county of Santa Cruz potentially loses its voice because it's just appended to so many other districts. It's an odd situation.
Gotcha. Let's turn our attention toward the bills that you introduced in the first year of the 2-year legislative session. If they have not been passed by the other house and signed by the governor and they're still live, they're called 2-year bills. And,
that is correct.
And they fall into 2 categories. They either have not made it out of their house of origin, which would be the Assembly, in which case they have until the end of January to do so, or
correct.
They made it out of their house of origin and they're over in the other house, the Senate, and they have until the end of the legislative session to be dealt with.
Correct.
Oh, good. So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Yeah. Do you have any 2-year bills? And if so, which category are they in? And tell us about them.
I have 2 2-year bills, both of which are in the Senate.
Go on.
So one is to deal with non-custodial wardship probation for kids, and we've been working with the administration, with the probation chiefs, and a lot of other stakeholders on how that works. And we had some last-minute challenges, including some questions from the governor, so we held that to continue to work on it. We've been working on it throughout the fall and will continue to. And the other one is one that would allow, so every courthouse, like every company, is required to have a lactation facility. And since attorneys are essentially a part of the legal system and are officers of the court, we wanted to make sure that attorneys, who spend a lot of time in courthouses, have access to the lactation facilities. And that was moving along swimmingly, and the courts then raised some objections, although it was questionable. And when I got on the phone with some of the leaders in the judicial branch, they actually agreed, and turned out it was kind of an implementation question. I'm not sure. So I held that. We came to agreement, and we're going to be moving that bill now. But it's in the Senate, so we have plenty of time. And that one really is ultimately a budget question.
Gotcha. Now, the non-custodial wardship for kids. I think we talked about this last June, that foster youth previously were sent out of state, but they got decertified November, December 2020. This is the bill that's addressing what happens to foster youth?
No.
Okay.
No, two different issues. So the issue about kids going out of state and California lacking the capacity to serve kids with some of the highest needs that are either in the dependency system, foster kids, or the delinquency system, kids in probation. That bill we were running through and working with the administration, all of that got folded into the budget with a very large chunk of money for implementation.
Oh, sweet.
And we're now looking at next steps. So that bill essentially died, and didn't end up having my name on it, but that was a major, major victory to the process we were engaged in. This bill, so the problem is that depending on the county that a child is in, when they're in a non-custodial wardship, meaning they're not being locked up, but they're on probation, they can be on probation for sometimes 3 years or more for very, very minor offenses. And the conditions that are put on them when they're on probation are often onerous. I mean, these are teenage kids. And if they fail to meet their probation conditions, then more conditions can be attached, or they can then even be locked up. So imagine a kid who's on probation because they're truant and they miss some meetings, or they can't manage 50 or more different conditions, and now all of a sudden they get locked up because they haven't met their conditions. That is not indicative of success. So for the same types of crimes, and these are more minor crimes, for the same or situations like truancy, right? The same situations, in some counties, kids will be on probation an average of 6 months, sometimes even less. In other counties, for the same circumstance, 3 years. So what we're trying to do in this bill is establish a 6-month review so that you can't hold a kid more than 6 months on probation unless there is a reason, and you need to demonstrate that reason, unless there is a reason to do so. So they could be on probation for 6 months, a year, year and a half, 2 years, or longer, but they can't just be stuck on probation, have a bunch of terms thrown at them, and then forgotten, which is what happens, and that leads to unsuccessful circumstances. So that's what we're trying to do, is put more reasonable conditions and set some specific timelines that cases need to get reviewed to get kids off of probation when they need to be off of probation. And then this would set a more general statewide standard so we don't have the disparities county by county where in some counties kids are averaging 6 months on probation, and others they're on probation much longer, up to 3+ years.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, when we spoke last December, I asked about about bills that you were planning on introducing this session, and you had nothing firm at that time. How are things looking right now? That's okay. I mean, you got plenty to do up there.
Still unfirm. Yeah, we have a longer list right now that we're looking at than we are going to introduce. I will tell you that, including budget items. So I'm not. This is tough because there's some really good ideas, but I'm cautious of capacity, and I don't know yet if we're going to have any similar limits like we did last year to the number of bills we're going to be able to effectively manage over this year. So I'm trying to be a little bit careful. The one bill we have introduced is a bill that we've been working on for a couple of years, and it went away through the pandemic because nobody thought it was very important. And that's essentially to create a wine label for an appellation for the Santa Cruz Mountains, the officially recognized Santa Cruz Mountains wines. So that one we've introduced, and it's an easy one. It shouldn't be very difficult to do, but it got caught up in the pandemic, and the committee that needed to hear it just didn't want to hear it, had too many bills, and it went by the wayside, unfortunately.
Now,
so
hang on.
That's an easy one.
I thought Santa Cruz Mountains is an official AVA, which is what, an approved viticultural area.
Yeah, but there's not it can't be designated on the mountains on the label as Santa Cruz Mountains. So there's sort of unofficial, where there's recognition as appellations and all that, and then there is, and unfortunately we have to do this in a bill every single time. And I wish there was a different structure that could be looked at and designate an area that can be officially Santa Cruz Mountains. And what that means is that the Santa Cruz Mountains wines can use that, will be able to use that term, but nobody else could use that term. And it's a way, we did this several years ago for Monterey, and obviously Napa. There are significant wine regions that already have this ability. Santa Cruz Mountains just doesn't. It's a little bit more technical, but
and what
I want to
bill?
make sure this is Santa Cruz Mountains.
What bill is that since it's introduced? AB
1617, 1617.
AB 1670, Assembly Bill 1670. Well, if you're in the wine business in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and Bonnie and I are, this is something that we want to pay attention to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, it's for us and for the identity and the types. Because Santa Cruz Mountains grow unique and very high quality grapes and produce some really excellent wines, and this is one of those things.
Well, we appreciate your working on that on your constituents' behalf. If you're just joining us, folks, it's KZAC Santa Cruz, the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club. I'm Dangerous Dan, and we're talking to 29th District Assembly Member Mark Stone. Okay, Mark, I want to turn our attention to the election calendar and keep it in the hypotheticals, if you will.
Yes.
I pulled down a calendar from the Secretary of State's page. And I'm looking at this calendar, and I want to kind of talk it through and find out, when things are official. So right now, we are in the signatures in lieu of filing period. What is that?
So candidates, because it can be expensive to file, candidates are allowed to go out and collect signatures. And I can't give you the details on this, but for every signature you collect, then the filing fee gets reduced. And if you collect enough signatures, which is several thousand, I think, then the county waives the system waives the filing fee. So for state elected offices or offices heading to the June primary, filing date is, I'm pretty sure it's March 11th. Whatever that Friday is. And then, so they open up the signatures in lieu, it's signatures in lieu of payment of filing fees, essentially. And so people are given a certain amount of time to go collect signatures.
Okay.
To reduce their filing fee burden.
Then, February 16th is the deadline for candidate statements for State Voter Information Guide for the Senate and constitutional offices. Not quite sure what a constitutional office, that might be, okay. Then,
so constitutional officers are offices that are listed in the Constitution. So governor, lieutenant governor, insurance commissioner, attorney general, controller, secretary of state.
Got it. Okay, then from February 14th to March 11th, we have the declaration of candidacy and nomination paper, period. I guess that's where everybody throws their hat in the ring.
Correct.
candidate statements for the county voter information guides for the House of Representatives, the State Senate, and Assembly. Deadline is March 11th. Mm-hmm. So is that when candidates are officially candidates, is March 11th and not before?
Correct. So the filing period, people will be pulling, what we call pulling papers, which means going down to your local elections office, taking out papers in order to run. And sometimes people will pull papers but not actually file. So they pull papers, and that because every candidate needs to get a certain number of nomination signatures in order to be on the ballot. I think it's 40. And the signatures in lieu can qualify towards that 40 if you want. And that's just people nominating you from the district that you're running in, nominating you to that seat. And it might be different for different offices. And this is true. So county supervisors who are on the ballot are going to be going through the same process. They will have to file by March 11th. But you cannot pull papers prior to that date. You can indicate your interest in running, and there are certain filings you can make. But that's where you get the packet from your local county elections. And since I represent 3 different counties right now, when I did that 2 years ago, I pulled papers from the county in which I lived. But I filed in the county in which I live, Santa Cruz County. But then I also had ballot statements, so I had to file ballot statements in the 3 counties for the 29th Assembly District. So that was Santa Cruz, Monterey, and Santa Clara.
Got it. Then there's a randomized alphabet drawing on March 17th, which I guess defines the order that you're on the ballot, that candidates are on the ballot. And then on March 26th, notice to candidates for voter-nominated offices. So I guess there could be people out there who don't know that they're running, that have been nominated by voters, and they get informed on March 26th. Hey, guess what? You're running for governor.
No. Yeah, right. That would be, I'll nominate you to run for governor.
No chance. Go on.
No, because we have what's called the top 2 primary. All of the candidates that go to the top 2 candidates coming out of the primary are nominated to go to the general election. So not everybody who files by March 11th will be going to the general election, even though they've filed to run in that election. So instead of being party nominated, which is what it did before, they are voter nominated. So the voters select the top 2 candidates to go to the general election. So all of the state offices, Assembly and Senate, and Congress are voter nominated as opposed to party nominated.
But this is in March, and the primary isn't until June. So that there's a certified list of candidates for voter nominated offices on March 31st.
Correct, because the local county officials and then the Secretary of State, the county officials determine who has filed papers, and based on those filings, who is qualified to be on the ballot for the primary in June. Because somebody may file, but that filing may end up being defective. So they certify to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State then issues a certified list of candidates. That's that list.
So if someone's running for statewide office, are they officially a candidate on March 11th when they would be pulling papers, or are they officially a candidate on March 31st?
They are officially a candidate when that list comes out. So in this case, March 31st. So just because somebody filed on March 11th, so they pull papers in February, file March 11th, and then that filing is vetted by the county, certified to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State then issues a certified list of candidates. That's when someone knows that they are actually an official candidate. Because if there was a defect in the filing, and sometimes defects are overcome, or the local elections official says you don't qualify, somebody will go to court to get a court to weigh in, and the court says, yeah, you don't qualify, or no, that was a de minimis failure, this person qualified. So all of that stuff can happen during that period if it's relevant, then the Secretary of State issues the final certified list. And so people are not actually candidates until that list comes out.
Got it. So that if I said over the air on Bushwhacker's Breakfast Club that I'm running for lieutenant governor because I want to be Gavin Newsom's sidekick, that doesn't make me a candidate. I have to pull papers on March 11th. I have to file, and it has to be approved by the Secretary of State, which is published on March 31st. That's when I would officially become a candidate, assuming that I checked all the boxes and got all the signatures, right?
Correct. That's correct. Although the term candidate is a little more nebulous than that, because there are people who run write-in campaigns, and somebody can say that I am a candidate. I'm trying to get enough people to write my name in order to be. And so a write-in candidate who is not on that list still could end up going to the general election if they get enough write-in votes and are first or second on that ballot. Then they don't have to pay any of the fees. And this will get done now. So in certain districts where there's only one candidate that's running, and that happens, and we've seen this actually several times in legislative races, assembly races, where there's only one candidate who files by March 11th. So then the list comes out, whatever that date is, March
31st.
Towards the end of March 31st. Okay, so the official list, and there's only one candidate running. Then someone else can go try and get a bunch of friends and family and others to write them in. And if they are, so if the leading candidate, the one who's officially on the list, gets 40,000 votes, and a write-in candidate gets 12 votes, and they are second on the list, they're then officially on the ballot in November.
But they officially become a candidate after the primary election because then they're one of the top two.
Correct.
I love learning how sausage is made. Mark Stone, California Assembly member. I mean, this is incredibly arcane, but it's how our system functions. And you have the patience, bless you, sir, to handle our deep dive into arcane questions here on Bushwhacker's Breakfast Club. So when last we talked in December, there was a hearing coming up the following week discussing statutes for incarcerating people experiencing homelessness. Can we revisit that? Did anything happen? Has anything come of that?
Well, things coming of that remains to be seen. It was a joint hearing between the Assembly Health Committee and the Assembly Judiciary Committee, which is my committee, because there are both health, mental health, and civil liberties questions that are there. Mm-hmm. And there were some simplistic solutions being proposed last year, and that's why we really wanted to hold the hearing, because there's a significant issue. But there are also some simplistic solutions that I think would not have been very productive. The hearing overall was over 8 hours, and we had lots of testimony, lots of public comments, and the issue was, I think, pretty well vetted out, and we were asking panelists for solutions, potential solutions. One of the most significant solutions, which is going to be the hardest, is fixing the mental health delivery system.
Right.
And that's kind of at the heart of this. And from my perspective, just making it easier to lock people up because they're inconvenienced is the wrong way to go about it. But bolstering the mental health system so that there are enough beds and services to help people who need the help, that's a different question. And so that's kind of where we're headed. There were a number of ideas that came out, and right now I'm talking to the chair of the health committee, and we're trying to see if there's a bill that both he and I can agree on that we can do to address some of these issues, but in the meantime engage the administration and other stakeholders in the bigger question of how we finally make some progress in dealing with the failures of the mental health system. You brought up the bill that we did last year for dependency and delinquency youth being sent out of state. And this is a subset actually of the same question, because California does not have the capacity to deal with kids with higher needs. And one of the reasons I've been focused on the juveniles and the youth in the state, one is that's kind of more interested in that, and I feel we have an obligation to our youth. But secondarily, that it's a more finite population. It is a little bit more sympathetic to policymakers and others. And as we make changes there, and when we've been working to change the mental health system with respect to youth, and we did, this is the notion that we've talked about before here of providing upfront mental health services to kids as they come into the system, as opposed to waiting until there's a diagnosis for them, meaning they're in crisis, before those services become available, essentially become billable through the state. That's been a major dysfunction. And we've been making some steps there. So I've been working on the juvenile system because part of it is showing that we can be successful and put in place policies that work and then apply them more broadly to the rest of the juveniles and certainly to the adult mental health system. So I've taken a bit of an incremental approach instead of wrestling the entire system. And we've been having some success there. And so that bill that we looked at last year, that ended up being a budget play, where we put the policy and the money, which was even more important, together to do some pilot programs to help kids with the highest needs in California. If we can expand that to the mental health system, to kids in mental health crisis, not just kids in dependency or delinquency, but in mental health crisis, which means we're now crossing over from Department of Social Services to the Department of Healthcare Services, Behavioral Health Services. And that's difficult because we would be going from one silo to the next. If we can start to do that and expand what those pilots were, we're now expanding the beds, the capacity, the ability for counties to react to the needs of kids in crisis or developing crisis. Those are sort of the steps that make some sense. So if looking at that in a microcosm as a way of dealing with youth, that is really what we need to be doing for the entire mental health system, is bolstering local resources, local capacity for people in crisis or people heading towards crisis, and having a place for people to go rather than jails, which is in a lot of places the only place that someone in crisis can go, because it's the only facility we have in California anymore, which is criminal in and of itself. And there's a long history to this, going back to when Reagan shut down the hospitals. That was not a bad move because the hospital system needed to be redone, but then nothing was done after that. And just because you shut down hospitals doesn't mean there's not a need for services, for beds, for crisis intervention, and all of those pieces. So that was something that was very short-sighted because it was not by any means a complete solution. And we've been living with the fallout of that decision ever since, because the states never developed that capacity locally. So I'm pushing to develop that capacity for juveniles, but we also need to develop that capacity for adults across the state. And that's where this Lanterman-Petrie-Short Act, which is the act that allows the state to lock people up who are a danger to themselves or potentially to others for mental health reasons, that's where that hearing, we were trying to look at what we can do, what needs to be done, and what we can do near term and longer term in order to protect people, protect the public, keep our communities working the way we expect them to work, but make sure we're providing a place for people to go.
So that your standing committee was gathering information on that. Let me tell folks that they're listening to KZSE Santa Cruz, that we have the KPFA Morning News coming up in just a couple of minutes, that we're talking with California 29th District Assemblymember Mark Stone, that I am Dangerous Dan, and that this interview has been co-produced by me, Dangerous Dan Orange, and Sleepy John Sandage. And with a minute left, I was going to dive into standing committee versus select committees. The standing committees like Judiciary, Human Services, Banking and Finance, Natural Resources, those are policy. The select committees are gathering information. Are select committees less active in the second year of a legislative session, or do they remain active? 30 seconds, Mark Stone.
Most select committees never even hold hearings. So most of the work gets done in policy committees, and policy committees hold informational hearings as well, which is what we've done. And Judiciary holds a number of informational hearings. I have a select committee on coastal protection and access to California's natural resources. We've done quite a few hearings over the years that then lead to policies, but policies don't go through a select committee. Policies would then go through a standing committee, which deals with policies. So it's different ways of collecting information to be put into the policy debate.
Got it. Mark Stone, 8 o'clock. It's KZSE Santa Cruz. I love the deep dives, and we're looking forward to talking to you next month. You've been listening to a podcast from an interview on the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club on KZSE 88.1 FM in Santa Cruz, California. This interview has been co-produced by myself, Dangerous Dan Orange, and Sleepy John Sandage. Groovy Gabe Orange helped get this interview into podcast format. KZSE is a student-run college and community non-commercial educational radio station broadcasting from the UC Santa Cruz campus. You can stream KZSE online at kzse.org. Thanks for listening.